Hi everyone, my name is Carlisle Dockery. I'm a senior planner at Circulate San Diego, and I'm here today to talk about how to be safe while walking and biking in the roadway. So first, we're going to talk about why walking and biking is good for us. This will be the reason for why I'm even here talking about this at all today. So step one, walking and biking is good for us because it gives us good exercise. There's all sorts of parts of our body that this is good for. Moving gets our muscles moving, keeps our bones strong, keeps our lungs full of nice fresh air, keeps our brain sharp, and keeps our heart pumping, keeps our blood flowing. So any type of exercise, getting your body moving is great, and getting on a bike or walking around is a perfect way to do that. Another reason walking and biking is great for the environment is because it gets us out of our personal automobiles. So if you've ever been behind a car or a truck on the road, or even a big diesel bus and seen a lot of plumes of smoke, kind of a funny odor coming out of the back, those sorts of things are not good for us to breathe in. A lot of times that is very harmful air pollution. It's bad for the environment. You're probably familiar with something called global warming. So all of those things can contribute to the burning of fossil fuels and the degradation of our ozone layer. So getting moving and staying outside of a car or using electric vehicles is really, really great for the environment. Also using things like buses or transit, where we can all combine our trips into one and thus essentially carpool. The environment is a really big factor as to why I'm even here today. Your school is participating in the Clean Mobility in Schools program that the district is working to implement in the Lincoln High cluster. So if you start to notice things like electric school buses or electric landscaping or food delivery trucks, even if you see some students at Lincoln High or staff members at Lincoln High riding around some flashy new e-bikes, all of those things are part of this program because your school district wants to improve the air quality around your schools and make it safer and easier for people to get around in different modes of transportation. So that's why we're here today, to talk to you about some other modes of transportation. Another reason that walking and biking is great for us is because it builds community. And this can be kind of a meta, confusing question to ask, but an example we like to give is if you're driving at even a moderate speed in a car, it can be really hard to pick up on small details around you and your neighborhood. You may be less likely to notice things like how many crosswalks an intersection has, what color your neighbor's house is, whether or not they have a fence. And so when you're out walking around and biking around, it's a lot easier to build connections with those people around you. You're moving a little bit slower sometimes you're moving faster because of traffic, but generally you're traveling at a sustainable pace and you can hold a conversation, meet new people. And going back to the environmental point, a lot of times you may even notice things like trash on the sidewalk or a little flower, and you can stop to pick it or water it or pick up some trash. So it builds community to walk and bike and be generally out and about in your community. And the last big one that we always like to emphasize is money. Driving a car is really expensive. If you've heard any adults in your life complain about the price of gas, that is not the only expense with driving a car. It just often tends to be the most regularly occurring, but there's also things like car insurance, vehicle registration fees, maintenance, paying for repairs, all things like that add up. And it can be thousands, tens of thousands of dollars a year, depending on how often you drive, how far you drive, and what kind of car you drive. So those expenses do not occur when you're walking around. And if you're biking, they're often a fraction of that cost. So walking, biking, even taking transit can save you a lot of money in the short and long term, as opposed to owning a car. So one thing that we love to talk about in this work is what a complete street is. This is kind of a perfect conditions report, things we would love to see. So a complete street has places for people walking. That can be wide sidewalks, usually room for a couple of people to walk side by side, for a wheelchair to travel comfortably, for a person pushing a stroller to travel comfortably. It also has spaces for transit. So you can see here we've got a lovely bus only lane so the buses don't get stuck in traffic. There are still some driving lanes open, typically more limited lanes, but this allows passage for anybody who does rely on a car and cannot opt into another mode of transit. It's got wonderful protected facilities for bicyclists, and it's comfortable and exciting to walk on. There's things like trees, interesting storefronts, trash cans, benches. It's just generally a pleasant experience to be out and about. But as I'm sure you're all aware, not every street, as much as we'd like it to be, is a complete street. And so we're here today to talk about some considerations that you'll want to be thinking about when walking and biking, especially on streets that are not complete. So the number one thing we'll stress first is the importance of communication, whether you're biking, driving, walking, using any other form of transportation. Communication is key. So if you're on a bike, that could be things like using your hand turn signals. If you're in a car, definitely things like using your lights, being aware. And if you're walking, things like making eye contact, just generally paying attention and making it clear and being predictable with your motions. So before we get started into the definitions of things that we'll be doing about walking, a pedestrian is a person who's walking or using a wheelchair or using a mobility aid of some sort, such as crutches or a cane. So when you hear me talk about pedestrians, just know this is generally who I'm referring to. The two main things we will stress for pedestrians are pay attention and be colorful. And as young people, I'm sure you hear this first one a lot. And I want to make it very clear, this does not apply only to you. This is something that adults often need to work on as well. So please don't think we're singling you out. This is just a general broad recommendation that we give to everyone. So, but paying attention is very, very important, especially when you're entering into the roadway. So we want to make sure you're not looking down at your phone or looking into a book or looking at a map, whatever that is. And this is generally for your own awareness. It's just always good to be aware of what's going on around you. Similarly, we're not saying like you can never use your phone while you're walking. If you're on a wide sidewalk, you need to stop for a second, send a quick text, or you're walking down a busy sidewalk, you need to be checking your map, that's fine. But just generally know what's going on around you. Don't run into people on the sidewalk. And when you're entering an intersection, definitely don't be looking down, just because we want you to be aware of what's going on around you. The drivers should also be doing the same thing. This lesson goes for all of them as well. But because you're young and you can't drive quite yet, this will be what we can operate within your control. The other thing we'll talk about on that note is headphones, listening to music. I think that's great. I love to go on a long walk, listen to my podcast, listen to music. Just generally make sure that it's not so loud that you can't hear what's going on around you. You want to make sure that you still have your awareness of your surroundings and you know what's going on, especially when crossing through an intersection. And the other note is to be colorful. And again, this is not something that we'll set as an ultimatum. We know not everybody A, owns a fluorescent vest, and B, is going to wear that, especially as a middle or high schooler. But we do want to stress that if you know you're going to be walking around at night or early in the morning, if you have the option to wear a lighter color, it's always recommended just to make yourself more visible generally. 3 steps to crossing the street safely. You're probably all aware of these, but we'd be remiss if we did not go over them. Number 1 is stop. Never just dart directly into a crosswalk or an intersection. Even if you do have the crossing sign, definitely it should be safe to cross, but good to just stop, double check first. The double check that I'm talking about is looking both ways. So again, don't just walk right into an intersection, check to make sure it's clear, and then listen is often a step that we may forget, but it kind of happens intuitively. This is just making sure that you hear things such as like an ambulance or a fire truck that might be coming down the road. If you do hear one of those things, it's best not to enter the intersection until it's passed, just because we do want to make sure that those drivers can get to where they need to go safely. And we don't want you to be putting yourself in harm's way by stepping out in front of them. I also want to define the right of way, which is the legal right to pass along a specific route. In simpler terms, it is knowing when you are legally allowed to be in the street. And luckily, as a pedestrian, that's a lot of the times. And that's maybe something that a lot of drivers are not aware of or may not always remember, but we're here to cover a few questions as to when pedestrians have the right of way. So our options here are A, never, B, in sidewalks, marked crosswalks, and unmarked crosswalks, C, at all times, and D, on weekends and during the day when it isn't rush hour. And the answer here, of course, is in sidewalks, marked crosswalks, and unmarked crosswalks. So generally speaking, what this means is if you are in a crosswalk or an unmarked crosswalk, which is where two curb ramps align from across the intersection but may not have a painted crosswalk, drivers of vehicles are legally required to slow down and stop for you to let you cross safely. Again, in crosswalks, marked crosswalks, generally speaking, most seem to be aware of this rule. Unmarked crosswalks is maybe a little bit less widely known. And in sidewalks means if you are walking on the sidewalk and a driver of a vehicle is attempting to enter, say, a parking lot or a driveway or exit one of those things, they are required to stop and let you continue on your path through the sidewalk before exiting that space. So this is generally, we want you to know what your rights are. I'm not saying dart out in front of a car if you are at a marked crosswalk just because you have the right of way. We do want you to stay safe. But if you are getting ready to drive or you have any drivers in your life, never hurts to pass this note along to them just so that they're aware and it makes it safer for them and for you when you're walking around. Another question we get a lot is if there's no sidewalk, where should you walk instead? And this is an unfortunate reality, but it is a reality. Not every place you need to walk is going to have a sidewalk, although we wish it did. But if you're ever walking in a place that does not have a sidewalk, here are some options for where maybe you would think you would walk instead. So option A is down the middle of the road. Option B is the same direction as traffic is traveling. Option C is the opposite direction that traffic is traveling, and D is anywhere you like. And the two most common answers we get are people who are not sure if it's B or C, and it's actually C. We want you walking the opposite direction of traffic. And the reason we want this is because when you're facing traffic, you can see the vehicles approaching you, and you have more time to react should you need to. If you're walking the same direction as traffic, a lot of times these cars may sneak up behind you. You're not aware of what's going on. And so we definitely want to emphasize that if you're walking in a place that has no sidewalk, you want to be walking the opposite direction of oncoming traffic. The last little quiz question I'll go over is if you see a crosswalk, but it's not at an intersection and there's no signal, what should you do? So a lot of times people may be confused at places like this when there's no stop sign or there's no light to let you know when it's safe to cross. A lot of times people aren't entirely sure when to cross at places like this. So some options could be keep walking until you get to an intersection because you can't cross if there's no light. Stop, look, and then cross. Stop, look, listen, and then cross when the coast is clear. Or C, cross whenever you want, even if it means stepping out in front of traffic. Or B, this is a reverse crosswalk. You can only cross walking backwards. Few goofy answers. The answer is indeed B, stop, look, listen, and then cross when the coast is clear. What this crossing is describing is a mid-block crossing. And so again, because pedestrians have the right of way in marked crosswalks, you do indeed have the right to be in this crosswalk, and cars should stop if they see you. They should see you. Cars should stop to let you cross safely. So again, before entering one of those mid-block crosswalks, just stop, look, listen to make sure that it is indeed safe for you to cross there. But that crossing is there for you to use, so please do use those. Now that we've covered walking, we'll go into bicycling safely. And again, a lot of these biking rules apply as well if you're riding a scooter or a skateboard. And similarly, while the rules apply, the rights also apply as well. So the great thing about being on one of these vehicles is you have a lot of the same, if not all of the same rights as a automobile. So the flip side of that is you also must follow the rules of the road. So things like that mean if you come to a stoplight or a stop sign, you do need to come to a complete stop. If you are approaching a one-way street, unless it has something like a two-way cycle track or a dedicated bike lane for the direction that you're traveling, you do need to make sure you're going the correct direction. And if you're making a turn, use your arm turn signals. We'll go over what those are, but it's good to make sure that people know where you're trying to travel. So the turn signals to know if you're turning left, luckily this is a pretty simple one. You just hold your left arm out straight, essentially pointing the direction that you're trying to go. Going right, you can do the same thing. You can point your right arm out straight the direction you're trying to go. Alternatively, if you only want to use your left hand, another accepted way to do that is to make a right angle with your arm to signify that you're making a right turn. And if you're coming to a stop or slowing down, you want to hold your left hand out by your side. That'll let cars know that you're slowing down, or other bikers or scooter riders, road users behind you, let them know what you're about to do. Just generally, you want to be predictable and communicate well, which we talked about earlier. The next thing we'll talk about is some different types of infrastructure you may encounter. So it's highly likely somewhere in your travels you've seen a lane like this with a painted bicycle in the middle of it. This is called a sharrow. It is not a bike lane, nor does it fundamentally change anything about the road itself. What it does signify is that the lane as it is too narrow to be shared side by side by a driver and a bicyclist or other road user. So this is signifying that you do have the right to use the full lane. And again, this does not change anything about the roadway. On pretty much every street in San Diego, you have this right to take the full lane. So this is just reiterating for drivers and other road users that they should and can expect to see bicyclists, scooter riders, other road users in the center of the lane, and they should not attempt to pass until it's safe to do so. So if you see one of these, just know you don't need to be hugging the right side of the road. You can take the center of the lane. Can and should. It's likely the most recommended option. These signs have a similar effect. Again, they don't make a bike lane, nor do they change anything fundamentally about the roadway, but they do convey to road users that they should expect to see bicyclists. So there's share the road on the left, and bikes may use full lane on the right. We do prefer the one on the right just because it's a bit more explicit in what it is calling out. So just know that that's what those signs mean. But things like this, we really enjoy. Things like a buffered bike lane, even better if you can throw some protection on there, Jersey barriers, some hard bollards, things like that. But if you have a bike lane, it's generally the safest place for you to bike. But again, it's not required. Say if there's something like broken glass in the bike lane or a illegally parked car, you can always enter the roadway. Just make sure it's safe to do so. We also have things like separated bike lanes that are usually inside of parking protection and at level with the sidewalk. Those are really, really wonderful. Or even things like two-way cycle tracks. You'll see a lot of these in downtown San Diego, things like up 6th and on Beach. These let you travel side by side with other bicyclists going the same direction, perhaps even on a one-way street. So like 6th, even if you're not traveling north or south, whichever direction it runs, east, west. Even if you're not traveling the direction of 6, you can use the cycle track, whichever direction you need to go. We also want to make sure we mention electric bikes. These are growing in popularity. There are 3 types of electric bikes, type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 3 is generally not legal for people your age to use. You have to be older than 16. So if you're an older high school student watching this, then you may have access to a type 3 e-bike, but generally type 1 and type 2 are the types of e-bikes that you'll see students your age using. Some of them may have a throttle, some may be pedal assisted, but again, you're required to wear a helmet, especially if you're under the age of 17. If you're on a type 3 e-bike, you're always required to wear a helmet. And if you're in a type 1 or type 2 bike, you can use those on any type of bike facility, but type 3, you need to be more cautious, and there may be more rules about where you can and can't ride those. So good to be aware of those options. One thing we also get asked a lot is how to safely make a left turn, because a lot of times the bike lanes are the rightmost lane of traffic. It can be really daunting if you need to make a left turn to have to cross through multiple lanes of traffic in order to do so. So while that is an option, and if you feel confident and comfortable doing so, that is definitely a recommended option. Just make sure that you're scanning and signaling each time you change a lane before turning, and that when you do turn, you turn into the rightmost lane you'll be traveling in. But again, if it's not something you feel comfortable doing, you can always do something that we call a box turn. So a box turn will just have you completely go through the intersection that you're traveling through straight and stop when you reach the rightmost lane of the lane that's going the direction that you want to go. So you'd come to a complete stop. If that's at a stop sign or a stoplight, you'd wait your turn until it's safe to cross, and then you can cross through straight going the direction that you wanted to end up going. If you'd feel more comfortable getting off your bike at point 2 and walking your bike through the crosswalk to point 3 and then traveling on, or walking your bike through the crosswalk from point 3 to point 5, that's also totally fine. Just make sure you're doing whatever makes you feel safest and what you're most confident doing. We also want to make sure we talk about what to wear while bicycling. So helmets are incredibly important. We want to make sure your head is protected in case anything happens to you while you're riding around out there. One thing that we commonly see is helmets that are not fitted properly. A lot of times people wear them really far back on their heads and expose their forehead. That's really dangerous. We don't want this part of your head to get damaged. So it's really important that you follow the 2-finger rule. Make sure that only 2 fingers width is in between the edge of your helmet and your eyebrow. You also want to make sure that V-strap that comes on most of your helmets is fitted around your ears. You don't want it together in front of your ears or behind your ears. That generally would mean your helmet is not on correctly. And again, with your chin, you don't want your helmet so tight that it's choking you, but you do want it tight enough that when you move your head side to side, your helmet doesn't wobble around and wiggle around. So make sure that you only have 2 fingers width of space between your chin and the strap. When biking, you want to make sure you're dressed accordingly. So if you have closed-toed shoes, we always recommend wearing some closed-toed shoes. Maybe if you need to come to a quick stop, if you fall off your bike, we don't want your toes to get all mangled. Just generally a good protection method to have on. If you are wearing long pants, a lot of times your pant leg is at the same level as the chain. And so we want to make sure your pants don't get caught in that or any of the other parts of your bike. So if you're wearing long pants that maybe have a looser hemline, you can either roll your pant leg up, you can tuck it into your sock, you can use something like a rubber band or a scrunchie just to keep it a little bit tighter around your leg. So just generally be aware of where your pant legs are and if they're loose and exposed to your bike chain. And then again, similar to walking, we're not requiring anyone to wear fluorescent vests, but if you have the option to wear something brighter colored and you know you'll be out and about at night, it's always recommended and never hurts to wear something bright. And the last thing we'll talk about is lights. You always want to make yourself seen. You can use lights during the day or at night. You always want to make sure your front light is a white light and your back light is a red light. That way, anybody approaching you either from the front or behind knows which direction they're approaching you from. If you're using them at night, you want them to be solid. And if you're using them during the day, then you can have them flashing. And if you want to spice your bike up, add some colorful lights to the wheels, wrap it around the frame, handlebars. No such thing as being too visible. Just make sure you do have those 2 basic levels of bike lights, and then go nuts, be really visible. So that is all we've got for you today. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thanks.